I didn't always used to use a bear fence around my apiaries, but when I moved to the North Georgia mountains, where we've got a lot of bear activity, I realized that I needed a beekeeper's insurance policy. And to me, that's what an electric fence does to help me protect my investment, which are my bees. And though I've never seen a bear attack directly, fortunately, I have come in after the fact and had to clean up yards after the equipment and the colonies had been devastated. Either it was my mentor's bees or a student's bees. It's not a pretty sight. If you've never protected your colonies against bears, I highly recommend you do so. In the beginning, the thought of an electric fence was kind of overwhelming to me. I didn't understand how to set them up, and I didn't understand the components. But as my hives grew and my apiaries, my locations grew, my mind had to grow as well. So I learned how to set up a fence. I learned all the components involved. And so that's what I'm going to be covering today. I'm going to be talking about each element and making it easy for you to understand if you don't have a bear fence. And at the very end of this video, I've got footage of my fence working. You're definitely going to want to see that against this little bear that came up, so stick around. Be covering the 5 elements that go into setting up an off-grid solar system for an electric fence. If you have power nearby, like in an outbuilding, a shed, or your home, you won't need quite all of these components. But the first one we're going to cover is probably the most obvious one, and that's the fence. You just need something long enough that's going to guard the perimeter of your bees and give you room to work inside without having the fence in your way. So that part's really simple. You'll notice my fence is not really a traditional post and wire fence like you see around maybe a small farmer's garden or traditional livestock fences. And that's because this fence, it's more of a netting. I'm able to have every wire hot. The very, very bottom wire is the ground wire. And electrical stuff, you need a positive and negative. And I like that all these strands are hot because it means a bear could touch any of them and get zapped. A bear's got bare pads and a bare nose. In other words, there's no fur covering those things, so they make a really great ground when they touch the fence, and they get that shock to their face that says, hey, you're not welcome here, buddy. And this particular fence is by Premier One Fencing Supplies. I get all of my components from them, just about all my components. This fence is super easy to take up if I need to and move it to maintain my yard, whether it's mowing or weed eating. It's easy to set up. It comes ready to just hammer each post into the ground with a rubber hammer, and setup is like super quick. Just sometimes I get kind of tangled up, and that's annoying and frustrating, but I would choose this over a traditional post and wire fence any day. So let's look at the other components that make this fence actually work. So the remaining 4 components that I used to have a complete system setup are all right here in line on this post, and the last one's in the ground. So we've got my solar panel, and sometimes you have to use a charge controller with that. I'll explain when, so that's easy, so you know whether you need one or not. Most of the time you don't need one. I've got my Energizer in this Sterilite plastic container because you don't want your Energizer to get wet. It will short it out and it won't be any good to you after that. I've got a 12-volt battery. Ideally what you want there is going to be a deep cycle battery. And then in the ground at the bottom, I've got my ground rod. And now we're going to cover each of these in detail so that you know what each component does and how to hook them up to get juice flowing through your fence so you can get juice flowing into that bear's nose. When this thing is working right and you have a good battery charge, this light blinks green. Every time it blinks green is when a charge is being sent through the fence by the Energizer. If this light ever blinks red, it means that the battery's low and needs to be brought back up to charge or replaced if the battery doesn't have any hope. So the second component I'm going to cover today is going to be the Energizer. I've got it hanging on a nail that I've driven through the back or the bottom of this container and into the post. And this is the component that sends the shock through the fence. This comes with either a 12-volt battery setup, a little plug-in for that, or you need to get this for AC power if you're going to plug it into a power source like an extension cord or a wall outlet. They don't come, as far as I know, being able to do both. So you need to know how you're going to power this first. And if you do get the AC power one, you pretty much don't need the other components in the rest of this video. But if you plan on, if you're away from a power source and you need to set up solar, which is every other case, then the rest of this video is going to be valid to you. I have an IntelliShock 10. That's the brand name from Premier 1. And 10 means that this delivers 1 joule of power through the fence. And they recommend at least 1 joule to defend against bear. So I run IntelliShock 10s, and I also have some IntelliShock 20s, which, as you guessed, sends out 2 joules. So I figure it's enough for 2 bears, so it's definitely going to run them away. There are 3 plugs on this. The side one, that comes out and has 2 alligator clips, like so. Red is positive, black is negative, and this goes on my 12-volt battery. Down here I've got a red positive wire and a black negative wire. This positive wire is the clip, right here is the other end, alligator clip, that actually goes onto the corner of my fence. So when my fence is completely hooked up, I hook this to the fence, and that's what sends the energy from this thing through the fence itself. Right now, obviously, it's unhooked, but this needs a power source in order to function. And like I said, if you don't have AC power to plug it into, you're going to need a 12-volt deep cycle battery. A car battery and a lawnmower battery will work in a pinch, but it won't last as long as a deep cycle battery. Those are the things that are meant to be able to take way down and bring back up with a charge. So this battery powers this Energizer with these alligator clips. As soon as I plug this in, my fence is ready to charge. However, over time, the third component, which is that deep cycle battery, is going to eventually deplete in power over time. Well, that's where the solar panel comes in, which is component number 4. The alligator clips on this come from the solar panel. My solar panel is charging my battery every day while the sun is out, even on a cloudy day. Let's go ahead and take a look at the solar panel a little bit more closely. So here's my solar panel. This one happens to be 20 watt. And because it's more than a 10 watt solar panel, I've got to use a charge controller, which is hooked up on the back. So these little pigtails, I've got my solar panel coming into the charge controller, and then this one here are the alligator clips that hook to my battery. This prevents my battery from overcharging. Now, you do not need a charge controller if you just use a 10 watt solar panel, which is what I run in all of my other locations. And that's kind of nice because it's one less component to fail in the system. Here is the last component. I've got an alligator clip coming from my Energizer, the negative terminal, down to this ground rod. This ground rod is about 3 feet into the ground. It creates a complete circuit, and this ground rod is exposed to a lot of moisture that is down on the ground. And as most of us know, even if we don't know much about electrical stuff, water is a good conductor of electricity. So with that ground on there and that rod down in the earth, it's really going to help me get a lot of zap into my fence. Now, of course, I've got the components that are available on Amazon linked in the description below, but I'll also put a link directly to Premier 1 Fencing. I'm not an affiliate with them, but it will give you an idea of what they have available. They have fences specifically made for beekeepers against bear. This fence is not one of those. It just happens to be a little bit taller. I liked it, so I got it. But my other yards have that bare fence that they make. And the idea is that the height and spacing of the wires are perfect for a predator like a bear. Now, one thing that fails the most on a fence, if it's not giving the juice that it's supposed to, it's usually because you have a poor ground. It's really important to have a ground rod and a good connection with your wiring to that ground rod in order to get the most kick out of your fence. Now the part that you've all been waiting for, the part that I promised you in the beginning, is that is that footage that I got of my fence actually in action. As you can see, this little bear is approaching and changes its mind really quickly. So here's that footage. Before you watch it, don't forget to drop me one of these, tell your friends about the Hive Doctor, and let me know what you think about what you're about to see.